In our last video, we learned how to get users to appear on the page so that we could select which user we wanted to chat with. In order to do that, we created a messages.js file, and we used the fetch API in order to go and fetch the information from our database in JSON format. Once we received the JSON response, then we called the function display users. And in display users, we looped through each user, creating a link, putting their name in the link, setting their user ID as a data attribute, and adding an event listener on click that would show the ID of the user that we selected with whom to chat. In this video, we're going to create a login page with a form where users will enter in their email and their password, and then we're going to verify that with the information that we have in the database, including this password that is encrypted. Let's get started. So you can see here, I've got a simple page called login.html, and there's not really anything on it. We've got our style sheets, and I've linked up the login script. Let's save that and upload it. Make sure the login script is uploaded. You can see here I've got a console message. And then if I go here and go to login, and we inspect, take a look at the console, we can see that our JavaScript is indeed loading. So let's create that form. And we'll start off by creating a section, and we'll give it an ID of form section. And inside that, we're going to put our form. Let me just flip over to Anglophone keyboard. And inside that, we're going to put a form, and we'll give that an ID of form login. The action that we want for our form is to post. So this keeps the key value pairs from appearing in the URL. And so we'll create a label and an input. And the label will be for email, and the input type will be email. And we'll add a little break at the end just to create a line. We'll name our input email. We'll set the ID to be equal to email. Although we don't really need the ID, I find it can be a little bit handy. After that, we are going to set the placeholder as, I guess, name at example.com. We'll set it to be required, and we'll set autocomplete to be equal to email. Okay. So if somebody has an autocomplete setting set up on in their browser, and they've got an email field, then it should help them autocomplete this input. And so let's create another one. And this label will be for password. So let's make it user password. And the type will be password so that the letters don't appear when we type them. We'll set the name to be user password. We'll set the ID to be a user password. And we'll set the placeholder to be password. Actually, let's set the placeholder to be like that. And we'll make it a required element as well. And now we just need to add a submit button. So we'll put input, and type will be submit. And the login attribute, or the value, will be login. And we'll put an ID on it. And we should be good to go. So let's save that and upload it. And now you can see I've got a little bit of styling that I've added just for the login button and things like that. But we've got a nice little form here, and if I can enter in my email, and you can see the automatic complete is working, and I can enter in a password. And of course, when I click on it, it doesn't do what I want, but that's what we're going to go and figure out now. So let's go to our login.js file. And the first thing we'll do is we'll create a query selector, again using constant, and we'll call it form. And I've called it a login form. And we'll add an event listener on submit. And when we submit, we'll call a function login user. How's that? So let's write that function. And obviously it's an event. And then what we'll do to start off with is prevent default, which will prevent it from going to a new page, which is the traditional way, let me just save and upload, of handling a form. So we'll refresh this, and now if I put in a password, and it's saying that it's not there, login form, what did I call it? Form login. Aren't I funny? Login form. So we'll upload that, and we'll come back here and refresh, and we'll put in some stuff. And now you can see when I click on login, it doesn't actually take us to a new page. It just stays on this page, and we're ready to script what it is that we want the form to do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the form data. So we're going to get the username and password. So I'm going to create a object called form data and make that equal to the new form data from the form. So this form here is referring to the form that I used for the query selector. And then the form data here is a variable that I'm making up and using the form data method in order to get the data or the key value pairs from the actual form. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to do fetch. So let's go back to our messages, and we can copy this fetch method. Notice that here I've got it inside a function, so it's a little bit different the way it appears, but we should be good. And the big difference from the messages.js, where we were just getting information, is that for the login, we have to send information to the database. So we have to be able to send the user, or not the username, but the email and the password to the database in order to authenticate the user. So what we're going to do is we're going to add headers. And the headers we want to add are the body. And for this, and then to the body, we're going to add the form data. So this is the object that we've created here. And then we're just going to make sure that the method is post. So this is the big difference from what we did in the previous video. After that, I'm just going to change this just so it differentiates from the other one. And then once we get a response of JSON, we want to print that out to the console just to make sure that it's working before we decide what it is that we want to do in the next step. So I'm going to save this and upload it. Oh, and we have to also change this to the proper file here. So I've got a PHP file called login, and I've got a query where I'm selecting the user ID, full name. I'm selecting everything from the table where the email is equal to the email parameter that we're getting passed from the request. After that, after getting the email, I'm also getting the login password. And you can see, so if it's set, then I'm setting the login password to whatever the person entered. Once we get the response, I'm binding the results, so the user ID, full name, username, password, email, and their favorite color. And then I'm doing a verification. Once I fetch that data, I'm doing a verification of the password to make sure that the login password, so the one that they've entered into the form, is verified against the user password, right? So the hashed version of the user password that's in the database. If that happens, then I'm returning the information about the user. If it doesn't happen, then I am returning a message saying that the login failed. And then you can see I'm encoding it as JSON, or echoing it out as JSON. And that way we should be able to have access to it in our JavaScript. Let's go back to here and actually put in a login. And now let's refresh and log in. And we're getting an array. And then you can see it has a message saying login successful. My user ID, my email, my full name, my username, and the hashed password, which I probably should not be sending back. Once we get the successful login, we're going to store some information in local storage. So let us set that up. So we're going to store session, or we're going to call a function called store session. And now let's go ahead and create that function. And so I'll go ahead and console out. Now we could do like we did for the messages and create that for loop. But because we only should be getting one user that is signed in, we're going to save some time a little bit. And so we're going to take the data and we're going to use the square brackets that indicate that it's an array. And what we want to get is the user ID, and we'll also get the data, and we'll get the element at the first index in the array, which should be the only element in the array, and we'll get the username. So let's see if this works. So you can see here on line 37 of login.js, we're printing out the username that will appear in the list of users, as well as the user ID. So now what we want to do to keep the person logged in is to store it locally. So we can use the local storage API, and we want to set item. And the item that we want to set, let's call it from user ID. And we'll set that to the same user ID information here that we logged to the console earlier. And let's do it again. And we'll call this from user name. and then data, get the first indexed element, and username is the variable. So let's upload that, and we'll come on over here to application. And you can see here in our application, we've got our local storage. Right now there's nothing in it, but if I just refresh this and then click on there and OSTMH and do login, now we can see in local storage, we've stored the user ID and the username. So we can use this to check if our user's logged in. So what we've added from the previous video is a way of adding headers, specifically the form data. So the email and the password that we're getting from the login form. And we're posting that along with the fetch. After that, we run the query to check to see if the user's logged in. So we fetch the information, and then once we fetch the information, we verify that the password matches in the database. Once we fetch the information, we verify that the password that the user entered matches the password from the database. Once we've verified that, we send the JSON, and then we store the user ID and the username in local storage right here. I hope this helps.